Welcome to FYI. I'm Barry ZeVAN, and it's a thrill today to welcome my guest, Ron Peluso, who is Artistic Director of the History Theater in St. Paul, Minnesota. And the reason we say St. Paul, Minnesota is because this is broadcast not only here in the Twin Cities, but of course on YouTube all around the world. And it's a joy to help people know around the world what a great theater you run, Ron. And thank you for being here as also not only a guest, but a great friend.
Well, thank you, Barry. Great to be here.
My pleasure. The History Theater in St. Paul, it has had a couple of names. I remember back in the 1970s, it was Chimera Theater.
And well, that's not exactly true.
Oh, really?
Because that was a separate entity into itself.
But it was in the same building, right?
We were in that building, but in 1978, History Theater was formed by Lynn Lohr. She's our founder. And they were in the Landmark Center in St. Paul for 10 years.
Okay.
And then when Chimera, the community theater, folded, the History Theater moved into that building in 1988.
Aha.
So a little history there for you.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And we've been there 30 years.
Oh, that's fantastic. And initially, didn't Lynn and her partner call it the Great North American History Theater?
It was the History Theater of St. Paul, then it was the Great North American History Theater, then it was the Great American History Theater. And then when I took over, I just said, everybody calls us History Theater. Why don't we just become History Theater? And that's who we are now.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So we've had four names or so.
So when did it become actually History Theater then?
That was like 1998.
Oh, wow.
Like that.
So yeah. It's been 20 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Time flies when you're having fun. The plays, it's really true. The plays you produce and direct are phenomenal. Some have actually been produced before, and I think a couple weren't they on Broadway too? Well,
for the most part, we commission new plays about the region here in the Minnesota and the Midwest. Mm-hmm. So we've done 120 original plays about the lives of people who live in this area. And occasionally, if a show fits our mission, we will maybe take it from an off-Broadway or Broadway kind of show. For example, we did the play Lombardi by Eric Simonson, and it played in New York, and I saw it there. And I know we're Minnesota Viking fans here, but all the Green Bay Packer fans showed up to see the story about Coach Lombardi, and it was a Broadway play, and it was a big hit, and it was a huge success for us.
That's wonderful. His son, I don't know how many sons he had, but his son was, and maybe still is, an attorney here.
Yeah.
And did he come and see the play?
He did not. He was out of town that entire time, but he was a St. Thomas grad, I think. Went to law school there in the Twin Cities, and but I'm sure he saw the show in New York.
Yeah, he shopped at my music store in the Baker Building years and years ago, back in the mid 1970s. Yeah, that's the only time I met him. I thought he looked a lot like his dad.
He does, yeah.
Yeah. So and a lot of people are not familiar. Of course, here in the Twin Cities, we're familiar with the fact that really one of the great playwrights, F. Scott Fitzgerald, was born at St. Paul.
Sure.
And I saw a play that you did about his life. What was that called?
We did a play called This Side of Paradise, which wasn't one of our original creations. It was written by a couple in New York, and I read it, and because they submitted it, and I thought we would do it. Mm-hmm. We had done, Lance Billville, our founder, one of the founders, wrote a play called The Beautiful Fools, which was about Scott and Zelda, and we had done that before my time in the early 80s. Well, but that's our mission, real stories about real people in the region.
Phenomenal. Recently, you did one about the Glensheen Mansion. I think that's coming back, isn't it?
Or it is coming back for the 4th time.
Wow.
It's one of those stories that it was probably the trial of the century back in 1977 when the murders at Glensheen took place up in Duluth. Mm-hmm. And the story went on and on for 20 years. As a reporter, you probably covered some of that.
Actually, I didn't.
You didn't?
No. No, I didn't.
But it was really one of those phenomenal stories of murder and greed, and
Yeah.
the Congdon family in Duluth. They were kind of like Minnesota royalty. They were probably the richest family in the state at the time, and for greedy reasons, the daughter-in-law Marjorie Caldwell and her husband Roger plotted to murder the heiress and collect their inheritance early. It's a bizarre story. We turned it into a musical. And when I would tell people we're doing it as a musical, everybody would go, "Really? The murder of these two people?"
Oh, that's funny.
And it's wickedly funny and charming and insightful, and I think it makes people think a little bit about what's important in life, family and greed and ambition. So it will play one more time this summer, the month of July.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I hope people will go again. I'm sure you have a repeat business.
Well, it's become like a cult thing. People come and for the third and fourth times, and they bring their friends. And but it's really a beautifully written play, and it's insightful by Jeff Hatcher, who's a nationally known playwright, lives here in the Twin Cities, and Chan Poling, who was one of the rock and rollers of the '80s with a band called the Suburbs.
Wasn't he Eleanor Mondale's husband?
He was married to Eleanor Mondale, the late Eleanor, and Fritz Mondale, of course, the former vice president, will be at the show this Saturday.
Oh, that's great.
It's one of my kicks. I get to say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the vice president of the United States."
That's right. Well,
and everybody stands up and cheers for Walter.
Yes, shameless plug. He endorsed the back of my book.
Oh, well, there we go.
Yeah, he's actually been on this show. One of the higher points of his life.
Well, I got to interview him for our play that we did last fall, All the Way, the story of the fight for the Civil Rights Act, and of course Walter was part of that fight with Senator Humphrey. So it was one of the highlights of my career. I got to sit down with the vice president and
That's wonderful.
talk politics.
So was that on stage?
Yeah, he came to the theater, and we did a little talk back with the audience.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was one of my first guests on this show a couple of months, 3 or 4 months ago. Yeah, wonderful man.
Yeah, terrific human being.
So it's really funny too when you mention a musical about something that's pretty tragic. It comes to mind Sweeney Todd. Not the most pleasant subject, but
grind them up, make pies out of people.
Oh
yeah.
my God! You didn't hear that, children. You didn't hear that. As an artistic director, first of all, you and I have some roots in the same part of the world, and Western Pennsylvania. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I think you're Newcastle.
Newcastle.
Yeah. But your mom went to high school with a man with whom I performed for 2 years, Perry Como.
This is true.
In Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. And Perry was a barber, which a lot of people don't remember, but indeed, what a joy to work with him.
Oh, sure.
And as you know, and as your mom probably told you, what you saw on TV was what he was.
Well, we had our Perry Como sweaters as children. So
I love it. Yeah, that was his signature dress. As artistic director, and I'm a former actor, I don't know if you can say you're an actor all your life, I still need 2 more weeks' work to get my equity pension, which tells you how much work I've gotten on stage since I joined the union in 1953. Only 2 weeks left. But anyway, as an artistic director, do you sometimes feel badly when you haven't been able to cast somebody in something? I've told actors, I've talked about acting a few times, and most recently at the Purpich School, and I said to the kids, don't take it personally. If you don't get cast in something, it's nothing against you. It's what you need for the show, what you think you need for the show. Do you ever feel badly if you haven't been able to cast somebody?
Well, you say don't take it personally, but it's very personal.
Oh, yeah.
Being an actor is really a difficult job, and you face rejection all the time. And sitting on the other side of the table, I think if you're totally unaware of that, then you don't have any compassion, you don't have any heart. Because people come out and they put their heart and soul on the line for you, and sometimes it's just not the right match, and you have to say no. And I think people on our side of the table lose a little sleep over that, especially when you get to know people, and if they are performers you've worked with before and they come in an audition, it's hard to say no, but sometimes you have to pick up the phone and say, this isn't the right match this time.
It's good to hear. And I hope
some people don't actually pick up the phone and call and reject people, and I think that makes the business even harder. But I think if you're just honest with people and you share you thank them for coming in and wish them well, and hopefully you'll do it again.
Sure. So they shouldn't give up.
Oh no, I mean, if you're an actor, you get used to the rejection, you get sent out for an audition, and you're there with 15 other people. So you do your best, and you should just put it aside and go on to the next audition.
Yeah. Amen to that. Maureen O'Hara told me, I was with her in Jackson Hole, Wyoming for a week during the Spencer's Mountain premiere week, and I had a friend who was a director, Delmer Daves. He was the only director Jack Warner ever kept on a contract for life, and so he had me be his who's the partner of Don Quixote? I can't remember the name.
Sancho Panza.
Sancho Panza. I was Sancho Panza. And so one of the private times was with Maureen, and she said, nobody should ever give up, as you just said, in this business. She said the sad part was, she said, she added to that, she said, I know so many people who have so much talent and they never get the breaks. And I know so many people with no talent and they get all the breaks. So go figure.
Yeah,
right?
sometimes it's just being in the right place, the right time.
Yep. Amen.
But you got to throw the line into the water to catch fish. So if you sit quietly on the shore, you're not going to play in the game. So
yeah, one more personal interjection, as I sometimes do. I had an agent once who, in fact, was Dick Van Patten's mother, and she said, Barry, she said, get up and read for a play called West Side Story. Go up and meet Jerome Robbins. So I go up to this office. She didn't tell me what the play was about. And so I go up to this room on West 46th Street, and he's sitting there behind a table with some other people. Okay, kid, tell me about yourself. So I started talking, and he said, you're perfect. He said, except you sound just like Jimmy Stewart. and I thought, what was I supposed to sound like? And then I asked her, it's about tough kids on the West Side. I said, hey, I could have put on that accent. I could have been tough. And so I think another thing is for an agent to tell you what the play's about.
That would be helpful. Yeah.
Yes. And who the characters are. How did you get into this business?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to.
Don't shorten it up. We have 15 minutes.
Oh, we got 15 minutes.
That's
okay.
right.
Well, I grew up as you know, in Western Pennsylvania, steel town. I wasn't exposed to the arts at all. We had football and baseball and marching band was as close to the arts as I think I got. But I was always interested in comedy on some level, and so Bill Cosby, I had all his albums as a kid, and Johnny Carson, they were the two people that I thought were entertainers, and I had admired them. But I got to college, I was a special education major, and I was playing basketball on the freshman team, and I made the team my sophomore year, but sat on the bench mostly. But I left practice one day, I was a special ed major, and I walked into a student union, and there was a production of The Fantastics, that charming little play about coming of age. This is 1969, 1970, and The Fantastics was, New York, 1960? So there was a little touring company doing this little play in the student union about a boy and a girl falling in love. And I remember walking home that night. In the play, there's a cardboard moon. There was a full moon that night as I walked back to my dorm, and I thought, that story is my story. I go through that same struggle as the kids in the play. So I thought, well, maybe I should take a class in that acting. I had no idea what this was about. So I took a class, and then I switched my majors. I eventually became like a communications theater major. And I taught high school. I got a job out of college teaching drama in Western Pennsylvania high school, which taught me a great deal because I realized how little I knew at age 21. And I did that for a year or two or three, and then took a leave of absence and came to the University of Minnesota to graduate school and see if I could learn something more. I did, went back, taught for 3 or 4 more years, and then came back to Minnesota and finished my graduate school and ended up freelance director and eventually finding a job at the History Theater.
Oh my, that's wonderful.
So it all begins with, exposure to the art.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why theater, I think, is important, that it goes into the schools. And at History Theater, we do a lot of that. We bring a lot of students in to see what's going on and learn about our own Minnesota history.
What made you choose University of Minnesota?
A college professor had been a graduate. He was a graduate of the University of Minnesota, and he had a book by Frank Whiting, who was at that time the legendary head of the department. And one of the reasons the Guthrie Theater is located in Minneapolis. And he said, if you want to go to a city where there's a good program, but there's also the Guthrie Theater there, a new regional company. And it was only 8 or 9 years old by that time. And of course, the rest is history, as we say.
Yes, absolutely, and appropriately so.
Yeah.
It's funny, our part of the country, and this is not definitely to minimize what Minnesota has produced. I mean, the people of Minnesota, Arlene Dahl and Eddie Albert and the Arness brothers, as they called them, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
But one person, aside from Perry, who I got to know a little bit, was born in Aliquippa, and that was Henry Mancini. And a lot of people don't know. They say, he's from that town in Pennsylvania? Yes, he was. And every time you hear his music, of course, yeah, he, wonderful man.
Yeah.
Wonderful man. Did you get to meet Henry ever?
Oh, no.
No. Okay. Yeah, he was here at Orchestra Hall conducting at one time, and when I was entertainment editor over at Channel 11, they said, "Oh, go on down," because you had known him before, just briefly, which I did, and so we had a very pleasant conversation.
Sweet.
He said I had beautiful eyes. What can I say? But and the photographer who was there is there to back that up. He heard him say that. He heard him say that. What are some of the plays that are coming up now for this coming season?
Well,
And currently, of course, please tell us.
currently we're doing a wacky musical by the creators of Glen Sheen called Lord Gordon, and it's about a con man who comes to Minnesota back in the 1870s and cons Minnesotans into giving him large sums of money that he's going to create a utopian society out west and bring 60,000 immigrants from Scotland to come, and everybody will get rich. And he cons these Minnesotans, and then he runs off to New York and gets involved in a scandal with the robber baron Jay Gould, and then ends up going on trial and escaping and running off to Canada, and the Minnesotans track him to Canada because they want their money back. And they nearly cause a war between Minnesota and Canada. President Grant has to actually intervene and stop the Minnesotans from crossing the border. So it's a crazy story.
That's fabulous.
So it's a musical comedy, as you might guess,
Yeah.
and a romantic tale as well.
Oh,
But it's fun, it's entertaining, and it's kind of a silly slice of history.
that sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Most of the shows that we do at History Theater have kind of a serious bent to it, even though there's comedy attached to most drama. And our long history has been about immigration and social justice and maybe gender, racial equality.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our plays deal with those major themes. This one just happens to be flat out fun.
Oh, it's fantastic. So the playwrights, had they just heard about that story and decided to research it more? Or?
Well, they were the authors of Glen Sheen, and it was such a huge success for us. I said, come back to me with another story. Whatever you guys want to do, we'll do. And Chan Poling, the composer, saw on YouTube Drunk History. There's like a show called Drunk History, and they, I guess the guys get bombed and they talk about crazy things. And one of them was Lord Gordon Gordon, this con artist.
Wow.
And so he came to me with the idea, and I said, well, I said anything. So off we went, and it's really a charming and fun story about, well, people who have a loose connection with the truth, I guess.
Yes.
So he's a con man, and kind of in the vein of Music Man, I would guess.
Oh, I love it. That's phenomenal. I mean, in my opinion, of course, what my opinion means nothing, but that sounds like it could be a Broadway
I think it's really
production.
good. I mean, the Glen Sheen show's probably, I think, artistically a little better, but this is also a delightful, charming piece too.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, that could be made into a movie, too.
Could be, yeah.
History Theater and MGM. Oh, my goodness. Okay, now the future shows.
Next year, last fall we did a play by Robert Schenken called All the Way,
Okay.
and it's about LBJ and the Civil Rights Act with Dr. King and Hubert Humphrey. The sequel is The Great Society, and it takes us from 1965 to 1968, that turbulent year. So it's the fight for the Voting Rights Act, and this is an election year. I think people understand how important the vote is, and this is where all this began. Civil rights in this country and race is kind of a complicated issue, and I think this is a really important story. So we're coming back with The Great Society to kick off season 41.
And that would be starting in September, would that?
In October 5th, we
October,
open.
okay.
Yeah. Following that, we're doing a revival of the Bobby V story called Teen Idol. And we did it a couple years ago. Last summer, we had a Broadway producer come in, and he gave us some suggestions, so we took them. We're kind of retooling the play a little bit. But young Tyler Michaels, who's kind of the Twin Cities young superstar, will play Bobby V once again. And it will open in November and play through December holidays.
It's wonderful. Then after that?
After that, 3 original plays, 3 women authors. The first one, Kira Obolinski, is writing a play called Stewardess, ! And it's about Mary Pat Laffey's fight against Northwest Airlines for equal pay for equal work for women. You probably heard the phrase 32 skidoo, and that was attached to women in the airline industry. Once you became 32 years of age, they considered you too old and you were forced to retire. Women weren't allowed to marry. They were expected to have certain weight and height requirements. And all of this took a 20-year battle that Mary took to the Supreme Court, and eventually she wins.
Wow.
And of course, they formed a union, and then, of course, several years ago, Delta bought Northwest and destroyed the union. So all that work for gender equity kind of went down the drain on some level. But that's the story of the stewardess, and so we're looking forward to presenting that.
Oh, it sounds fascinating.
Yeah. It's a really important story, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember when we used to call those wonderful people stewardesses.
Right.
Yes. Now they're flight attendants.
Everyone's
right?
a flight attendant now. Because, they weren't allowed to be pursers, there are job restrictions for women. So in the Me Too era, I think this is really an important story to tell.
That's great. And after that?
After that, there are 4 Catholic nuns of the Sisters of St. Joseph Carondelet. They are also, by birth, sisters, the McDonald sisters.
Oh, wow.
They're all in their 80s and 90s now, but 2 of them, the young ones in their 80s, you can see them Wednesday night on the Lake Street Bridge out there protesting for peace every Wednesday night. And they have fought for peace and social justice their entire lives. They are 4 courageous stunningly brilliant, smart women who believe that the world can be a better place if you just reach out with love. And so we're telling their story.
Wonderful.
Called Sisters of Peace, the McDonald Sisters, and that'll be next March.
Okay.
Following that, Lori Flanagan has written a play about 4 women who were spies in World War II. Betty Pack being the featured character, as she was from Minnesota. Betty used her charm and sex appeal to infiltrate the Nazis and understand part of the invasion of Africa was made possible because of the information she gathered. And my dad was one of those GIs that landed in North Africa and was part of that invasion. And who knows, maybe the information Betty gave actually saved my dad's life.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So a World War II story, and 3 other women are also part of that story of espionage. So that's next year's season.
That's outstanding. I'm not pretending to get goosebumps here. It's real.
Well, you know, when you do the stories of real people, and they have these, it doesn't take much to dig deep enough and find the real heartfelt stories of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And they do give you goosebumps, you know, because they're courageous people whose history books don't usually record all of them. Yeah, but there's a lot of courageous acts that go on, and I think what makes history theater unique is that you go to the play and you learn something about the region, but you also learn about the people who made it a very special place to live.
Oh, absolutely. Excuse my ignorance here, has any show like CBS Sunday Morning or something ever done a story about the history theater?
I don't think so.
Well, they should.
They should.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're one of the most unique companies in the Twin Cities. And, you know, Aaron Hart, who's a former Pioneer Press critic, wrote, "Every city in America should have a history theater."
Mm-hmm.
And every time I get on the escalator at the airport, coming down Pittsburgh to see family members, and I look up and see those pictures of the steel mills and I think, wow, Pittsburgh should have a history theater. The number of immigrants and people who have come through there, you could tell stories forever.
Amen.
And our state is only like 150 some years old, so could you imagine what history could be found further east and
That's
west?
right. A couple 100 years.
Yeah.
Ron, I can't thank you enough. And best of luck always.
Oh, thank you, Barry. What a pleasure.
My pleasure. And now the shameless plug. A little bit of history in my book here. It's not exactly what you think. It's not all about who I've been blessed to know socially and professionally, but also some stories, as actually as Vice President Mondale said on the back, it's a story of survival. And so I hope that you'll look at it on Amazon, and that's about it. Thank you for watching. See you next time.